Good morning, this is Jen, the Liberty Lion, and today is March 4th, 2022. So I want to bring up just a few things about the Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, perpetual war, and the journals of the Continental Congress. So, what I'm going to tell you is that there is a way to get to peace from where we're at, and that way is in the Articles of Confederation. And there is some also indication that the Constitution was, in fact, an amendment to the Articles of Confederation. And that amendment was to be used in wartime only and was, in fact, war powers. This idea came to me from Napolitano, who had mentioned it many times, and the fact that there is no repealing clause for the Articles of Confederation. Repealing clauses have been something that's been used for hundreds of years. Whenever you wanted to repeal a law, you used a repealing clause in the law that repealed the previous law. So if the Constitution were to repeal or replace the Articles of Confederation, there would have to be a repealing clause in the Constitution. There is not. There is only a small sentence for a more perfect union, meaning it was already perfect and it's just been made more perfect. So the Constitution appears to be an amendment to the Articles of Confederation to allow extra powers for the Congress in the United States, or Congress of the United States, to enact itself for war purposes under war powers, and then to declare peace and revert back to the Articles of Confederation, which is the United States of America in Congress assembled. And at that point in time, we would be in a time of peace and back into the Articles of Confederation, in which Article 9 states that a, quote, a committee of the states would be sitting at the seat of government, and there would be one delegate from each state, and that they would appoint other committees and civil officers as may be necessary for managing the general affairs of the United States under their direction. Because even in a time of peace, you have military posts to which equipment and officers would need to have some sort of funding to keep up with the military post and the equipment. So they would appoint one of their number to preside, provided that no person be allowed to serve in the office of president for more than 1 year in any term of 3 years. So when you go back to peace, you're under some different peacetime institution or assembly, or they call it committee, at the seat of government, just keeping the skeleton crew going. So this is what I'm going to tell you. And now I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you. So this is the Journals of Congress, page 636. The same members attending yesterday, the Committee of the States, is adjourned at 10 o'clock tomorrow, and this is August 13, 1784, prior to the Constitution, okay? Okay, so the next thing I would like to look at is the Constitution, and I always use the Constitution at this website, uscode.house.gov. it lists all the organic laws, and you see it still includes the Article of Confederation as organic law. So, Constitution of the United States, all we really need to do is look at the preamble. We, the people of the United States. These are the representatives or the delegates from the states, are we the people. If we go to the book, Anatomy of the State by Murray Rothbard, and page, let's see, on page 10 in the first chapter, actually it starts on page 9. He said, it's common to hear sentiments expressed which violate virtually every tenet of reason and common sense, such as, we are the government. Now, I'm not saying that we are not the government. I'm saying that we are not, we the people of the United States. And he makes the case for it, Rothbard does, in Anatomy of the State, where he says, the useful collective term we has enabled an ideological camouflage to be thrown over the reality of political life. If we are the government, then anything a government does to an individual is not only just and untyrannical, but also voluntary on the part of the individual concerned. If the government has incurred a huge public debt, which must be paid by taxing one group for the benefit of another, this reality of burden is obscured by saying, we owe it to ourselves. If the government conscripts a man or throws him into jail for dissident opinion, then he is doing it to himself. And therefore, nothing untoward has occurred. Under this reasoning, and this is really an interesting point he makes, if we are the government, and that applies everywhere, such as in Nazi's Germany, the Jews murdered by the Nazi government were not murdered. Instead, they must have committed suicide, since they were the government, which was democratically chosen, and therefore anything against the government or anything the government did to them was voluntary on their part. So in other words, the Jews, which under the idea of them being part of government, weren't murdered by other people. They committed suicide, and they tortured themselves, and they put themselves in concentration camps, if, in fact, we are the government. We are not the government. The government are the representatives. And here we see we, the people, are the representatives of the United States. And they do this for certain purposes, which is a more perfect union, justice, tranquility, common defense, general welfare, blessings of liberty. Okay? And who do they work for? For the United States of America. And that, by all accounts, appears to be a nod to the Articles of Confederation, which are the style of the Confederacy, the United States of America. So you have under the Articles of Confederation, the United States of America, which created a Congress of the United States for war purposes. And the Congress of the United States acts during war under the Constitution. So, under the Articles of Confederation, when the people in Congress assembled in the United States under the Constitution declares peace, we revert to the Articles of Confederation, and Article 9 states what should happen at the seat of government and the military posts in time of peace. The United States in Congress assembled shall have authority to appoint a committee to sit in the recess of Congress, to be denominated a committee of the states, and to consist of one delegate from each state, and to appoint such other committees and civil officers as may be necessary for managing the general affairs of the United States under their direction, to appoint one of their number to preside, provided that no person shall be allowed to serve in the office of president more than 1 year in any term of 3 years, etc. If you watched my previous video, I talked about the positive laws and the non-positive laws. And the non-positive laws appear to be, for the most part, instruments of war regulated under the Constitution, the wartime document, the document for the Congress of the United States, and the President of the United States as Commander-in-Chief of the Land and Naval Forces. So once peace is finally declared and the Congress assembled goes back to being a committee of the states under the Articles of Confederation, we will finally be at peace, and the Constitution's war powers will be quieted. We will look at George Washington's transcript of his farewell address in 1796. He says, "Hence, likewise, they will avoid the necessity of those overgrown military establishments," and he's talking about the people when they go to vote. And when they vote in people, they will vote people who will avoid the necessity, and the people that they vote in, the military and the civil servants, will avoid the necessity of those overgrown military establishments which, under any form of government, are inauspicious to liberty, and which are to be regarded as particularly hostile to Republican liberty. And he goes on to explain why and how he believes the two-party system is detrimental to freedom and peace. Now we look at the transcript of President Dwight D. Eisenhower's farewell address, 1961. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. He continues in his 6th article of his speech. Down the long lane of the history yet to be written, America knows that this world of ours, ever growing smaller, must avoid becoming a community of dreadful fear and hate, and be instead a proud confederation of mutual trust and respect. Such a confederation must be one of equals. The weakest must come to the conference table with the same confidence as do we, protected as we are by our moral, economic, and military strength. That table, though scarred by many past frustrations, cannot be abandoned for the certain agony of the battle. So not only does he use confederation, which he may mean it in a different way than the Articles of Confederation, he may just mean a firm friendship. But I find it interesting that he says, avoid becoming a community of dreadful fear and hate. And I talked about this in one of my other videos where I brought up circling negative and how war and many of the things government does circles us, each individually, with negativity. That includes things like wearing the masks, the mandates, registration of your private property, IRS, the fear of losing your property if you make a mistake on your tax return, confiscation of wealth, the institution of debt notes based on federal papers, and papers are currency, and all of these things surrounding us with negativity causes us to become smaller and smaller and shrink because of our fear, instead of being proud and strong and courageous. We become sick, fearful. Let's look again at the Articles of Confederation. Article 2. Each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence, and every power, jurisdiction, and right which is not by this Confederation expressly delegated to the United States and Congress assembled. So we have a Congress of the United States of America acting under the Articles of Confederation, which created a United States and Congress assembled. And the Constitution then writes of the powers of the Congress of the United States of America, which was to create a military power used during wartime. And in the Constitution, we see that in the Preamble, where it says, "We, the people of the United States, work for," you see, "for the United States of America, the Confederation, to do these things." We also see it in several other places, among which are Article 2. 1. The President is the executive of the United States of America. And under Section 2, we see the President is the Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States. And he is also the commander of the militia, who are the private citizens of the several states, but only when called into actual service of the United States. Of the United States military power, bringing the states' military forces together to fight an enemy who has come upon our shores. That's when the United States Congress and the Constitution are called into action to give the federal government war powers to defend all the states collectively. When the threat is gone, they regress back to a smaller, peaceful power under the Articles of Confederation, the United States of America, in Congress assembled, and at the seat of government for the Committee of the States, and a president who will serve 1 year in a 3-year span of time. Now I'd like to read a small section of 3 Days in January, Dwight Eisenhower's Final Mission by Brett Baer, page 233. Ike shrugged off the question, saying, "Well, there are critics, and they have a right to criticize." But when Lillian Levy of the Science Service asked him to elaborate on his warning to the nation about a military-industrial complex, he was happy to do so. Quote, "When you see almost every one of your magazines, no matter what they are advertising, has a picture of the Titan missile or the Atlas or solid fuel or other things, there is becoming a great influence, almost an insidious penetration of our own minds that the only thing this country is engaged in is weaponry and missiles," he said. "And I'll tell you, we just can't afford to do that. The reason we have them is to protect the great values in which we believe. And they, our values, are far deeper even than our own lives and our own property. As I see it," he added, "that only an informed citizenry could stop the abuse." An informed citizenry would include knowing that organic laws all work together. To say that the Articles of Confederation were repealed or replaced by the Constitution would be the same as saying that the Constitution repealed or replaced any of the other laws that came before it, such as the Declaration of Independence. That would make no sense. And it also makes no sense that the Articles of Confederation were repealed or replaced by the Constitution. Again, the Constitution would have to include a rescission of the Articles of Confederation. It would have to state this Constitution repeals the Articles of Confederation. It doesn't say that anywhere in the Constitution. Being a permanent seat of government does also not mean that we are to be at a perpetual state of war. It simply means that either you have the seat of government working under Congress of the United States or the seat of government working under Congress of the United States of America for peace, which is basically a skeleton crew of the government under the Constitution called a Committee of the States, and a president serving 1 year at a time. I just want to point out really quick here. Here is a Confederate States of America soldier discharge paper. A volunteer member of the military is a member of the militia, and they are called privates. And you see right here it says a private of captain. Okay, so he was a captain, but he came from the private class of people. And we know that in the Constitution, as I showed you before, that the commander-in-chief, as president, is in charge of the land and naval forces of the United States, and separately, he's also in charge of the private people when called into actual service, and that's the militia. At no other time is there anything in the Constitution that says the federal government has authority over any private person. Only when they're in the militia and called into actual service of the United States. At no other time does the Constitution allow any Congress or president or judges any authority or power over people not on federal lands, which are the private people. The private people are off the federal lands. Authority over the private people, never. Only when called into actual service. Now, I know this says Confederate States of America, and we're talking about the United States, but the private people are in the Confederate States. And this was probably for the Revolutionary War. I don't readily see a date on here, day of March 1863. Okay, so this was a Southern person from one of the Southern states who served in the Confederate Army as a private in 1860, looks like 3, to serve for the war. Okay, Army of the Confederate States. Now, the military laws are the military laws. It doesn't matter if you come under United States or you come under a Confederate state or you come under the French government or you come under any other kind of government. When you serve as a private person, you're serving as a member of the militia, and there's plenty of discharge papers out there for private people discharged from service to the United States. So sorry about the dog barking, but she's uncontrollable sometimes. So here we have History of Congress, Militia of the States, House of Representatives, December 1816. And it's talking about, of course, the militia. And if you go down here, you see that the militia shall be organized by the legislatures of the several states and territories, because not all of the land on the continent of America was made into states yet. There was a whole territory out west that hadn't been made into states yet. And they'll be divided into brigades, regiments, corps, etc. So what they did, my understanding of what they did, was they took all the private people, which comprised the militia, and then they separated them into age groups. And here they have a part of the militia that's, of course it says the privates, of the rifle regiment, and of the light companies of each regiment of infantry shall be composed of men between the ages of 18 and 31 years. So the older men, they had them doing, it appeared like they had them doing less rigorous things, and the younger men were more marching and doing the more difficult exercises or work. Okay, it talks about arms and arsenals, the War Department. Here again, every officer, non-commissioned officer, musician, and private of the militia, who shall be detached as aforesaid, and shall disobey the orders of the president, because the president orders the militia, right? We saw that when they're called into service of the United States. So the United States is when some of the states are being attacked. So what they did was each state was in charge of its militia. And they would call the militia forth if something was happening in the state. But if something was happening in more than one state, in several of the states, they would call the militia of all the states or several of the states to defend the other states. So it could be that you're called forth under the United States to serve in the militia to defend some other state or your own state. But when it was an act of war against one state, it was considered an act of war against all the states. But you had foreign people invading the country, and that would be enemies foreign. And then you had uprisings in the state, in a single state, like let's say Virginia was having a problem that was a matter that affected only Virginia. Then the governor would call the militia. Okay, it's basically the same as what it is with the National Guard now. But the National Guard was the militia, or would be militia if you compared the two to back then. Whenever the laws of the United States shall be opposed, or the execution thereof be obstructed by combinations too powerful to be suppressed by the ordinary course of judicial proceedings, or by the powers vested by law in the marshals, it shall be the duty of the president to call forth such portion of the militia as may, in his opinion, be necessary to suppress such combinations and to cause the laws to be duly executed. So let's think about this for a minute. You're talking about 1816, when they were still concerned about foreign forces invading America, or foreign people coming into America and trying to wage war inside America. So in this situation, you would have maybe small factions of people uprising against the state and trying to overtake the state, maybe for another country. And so the militia would be called forth. So small enemy or large enemy, foreign or domestic. So combinations too powerful to be suppressed by the ordinary course of judicial proceedings or by the powers vested in the marshals. Sorry, I had to pause for a sneeze. So let's go on here. It says that in case of an insurrection in any state or territory against the government thereof, that's the government of the state or the territory, it shall be the duty of the president, on the application of the legislature of such state or territory, or the executive of such state or territory, when the legislature thereof cannot conveniently be convened, to call forth such number of the militia. So this is the executive power of the president in the Constitution under Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution that I showed you before, where he's the executive. The president has two offices: the executive of the United States of America under the Confederation, and the president, commander-in-chief of the United States Land and Naval Forces. So he's in charge of the military of the United States. That's the states joined together for military purposes only under the Constitution. Or as executive officer in defense of the Confederate States when there's an uprising against the government of the state. So I hope that I made that clear. Sometimes it's hard to tell if I'm being clear because I know what I'm saying, but if you're hearing this for the first time, you may not understand what I'm saying. If I'm not clear, just leave a post in the comments and I will address it. Whenever from any of the occurrences herein mentioned, it shall become the duty of the president to call forth the militia, he may require the governor or commander-in-chief of the militia in any state or territory, or such officer of the militia as he may judge expedient, to execute his orders so far as they may be applicable to their respective commands. Okay, so again, the president, under Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, given the power over the militia. He's given the power over the private citizens when they're in the militia. And in no other place in the Constitution does the president or Congress have power over private people, because private people are in the United States of America. Public people, when serving the federal government, are in the United States. So I have another congressional record that shows the difference between an American citizen and a citizen of the United States. And I'll have to look for that, but I'll bring it up next in this video. Okay, so this is the American citizen or citizen of the United States issue that I want to bring up. And I've talked about this and shown a lot of documentations in my very earlier videos about the difference between American citizen and citizen of the United States. If there were no difference, then it wouldn't matter how they write it. If they call you American, if they call you citizen, if they call you citizen of the United States, or whatever they call you, it wouldn't matter if it didn't matter. But the fact of the matter is that it does matter. It matters because they're two different people. They're two different types of people. You have private people under the Articles of Confederation who are Americans, and then you have Americans who, depending on what state they're in, the laws vary, become citizens of the United States, which are federal citizens or people on federal lands who go to work for the federal government, receive compensation for services from the federal government, and therefore are federal taxpayers. American citizens are not federal taxpayers, and if you notice on many of the documents that come from the quote legal state or federal state, require you to state whether or not you're a citizen of the United States. So in this record, the Congressional Globe, the official proceedings of Congress published by John C. Reeves, Washington, D.C., 33rd Congressional First Session, Wednesday, May 3rd, 1854. They go on because they're going to pass a law about black people becoming citizens. Okay, or saying that only white people can do certain things. And this is from 1854, okay? So we obviously wouldn't write things in such a way today. And they did strike it out then, but I want to point out to you they didn't only strike out black, they struck out American. So here, this guy is he's bringing forth a proposal that he wants to have passed into law. And he's writing it as, and be it further enacted that to every white male American citizen of the United States, or has declared his intention to become such, over the age of 21 years, he removed to da-da-da-da-da. Okay, and again, white male American citizen. Again, to every white male American citizen of the United States, or who has declared his intention to become such, over the age of 21 years, who removed to and was residing in any organized territory prior to the 1st day of January 1853, there shall be given, etc. Again, every white male American citizen of the United States. And to each white male American citizen who shall have removed or shall remove to and settle in said territory, da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay, again, few American citizens there, okay? And then you get over to here, and it says, I rise, Mr. House says, I rise to inquire of the member of the Committee on Public Lands who reported this bill, what object the committee had in using the peculiar phraseology that appears in the second line, white male American citizens of the United States, because there's no such thing. There's no such thing, okay? You're either a American citizen or a citizen of the United States. So when the Constitution was ratified by a state, that state selected certain people. Those certain people would go to the federal district court of record, and submit an application to become a citizen of the United States. So we're switching from under the Articles of Confederation, free, sovereign, and independent American citizen, over to become public. So they went from private, American citizen, Articles of Confederation, which is private, which is where the militia is, to become a federal worker or a military person, a citizen of the United States. Public. Okay, so they were going from private American to public citizen of the United States. And when they did that, they moved out of the state so that they were no longer an inhabitant of the state, a requirement in the Constitution, to moving onto the federal lands to become a citizen of the United States, a public servant. And those people on those federal lands were guaranteed a Bill of Rights. American citizens off federal lands have all their rights. And this is important to understand because in one place, you're free, sovereign, and independent, and you have all your rights, and the government can't take them away. And in the other place, which is on public lands, the federal lands, you have limited rights, you have duties, and you have obligations, and you're given certain other rights, privileges. That's the word I'm trying to think of. You're given privileges. So you have the privilege of having your medical taken care of. You have the privilege of having housing given to you. You have the privilege, of base housing, of having an office on post. You have the privilege of having a uniform, being supplied with arms, and all these kinds of things. But as a right, you also have the right to let people off post know, off the federal lands, know what's going on the federal lands. And you also have a right to speak your mind in Congress. So if you are a citizen of the United States on federal lands, working as a public person, a public officer or employee, you are guaranteed the right to go to Congress and tell them exactly how you feel about something. So if they're doing something wrong, you're guaranteed the right without repercussion to go in and tell them what they're doing wrong. That's where the Bill of Rights are. People off federal lands, American citizens, have all their rights. And I know this goes against what a lot of people have believed all their lives. And when you are taught something new, you automatically reject it because you reject new information over your beliefs, no matter how much sense it makes. And that's true for a lot of people. Some people can reason things out. When they first hear something, they don't automatically reject it. They use reason and logic, and they look for the facts, and they try to apply common sense. But it's not everybody who's able to do that. So hopefully the people that are listening here today are able to do that. They're able to apply logic and think about what I'm saying and say, hey, this actually makes sense, instead of automatically just rejecting it. And it's written down in some of the papers that Eisenhower had published through a committee that he appointed. And they got all their information from the state's attorney generals. So it wasn't like Eisenhower just developed this information out of his own mind, or he appointed a committee of people who just developed it out of their own mind. They actually got all the documentation from the states that said this, and then they put it together in a report, and they published the report, and it was published in 1956 and 1957 because there's two parts. So he says the peculiar phraseology that appears in the second line, white male American citizens of the United States. So everybody laughs, laughter. And Mr. Disney, well, what of it? And Mr. Howe, I should like to know why the word American, not black, American is used here. And I want to enlarge this, but the more I enlarge it, the more like digital it gets. And I'm not really sure if you're going to be able to see it, but word American is used here. And it goes on, or who have declared their intention to become such. So what he's saying is that when you want to become a citizen of the United States, you have to declare your intention to become a citizen of the United States, a federal citizen, a public servant. You have to go into the district court to the section where they have a court of record, and you have to apply, and then it has to be approved. And then you become an officer of the United States, which is a public servant, which is an officer, or you can also do that to become a civil servant, which is a civilian, not military, working for the military. Now it strikes me that this language is somewhat unusual. I propose to strike out the word white in the first line and American in the second line, so as to leave the sentence to read, male citizens of the United States, or any persons who have declared their intention to become such. Today we believe that if you're an alien, you have to go into a court and become a citizen of the United States. This is why the Democrats are constantly letting immigrants flood into the country, because those immigrants are going to the courts and declaring themselves to be citizens of the United States, not American citizens. And if you look at the alien and nationality title, it's not been passed into law. It's because they're not running it as though it's constitutional. They're not doing it in a constitutional way. So then we go, I propose to modify my amendment so that it shall read that to every male citizen of the United States, or to such person as shall declare his intention to become a citizen of the United States, etc. Okay? The N-word are not recognized in some of the states as citizens, and I understand this section, as it now reads, requires that there shall be given to every white male American citizen of the United States, or who has declared his intention to become such, etc., laughter, that is his intention to become a male citizen, etc., laughter. So it reads now, okay, because they don't want men to have to declare that they're men. It is wrong, and yet to correct it may appear hypercritical. I do not understand the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Howe, as intending to give the rights secured in this bill to black people. I suppose his amendment was designed simply as a correction of language, which is evidently wrong. So even they're not sure why, Mr. Hughes is not even sure why they have to change the wording. So even he, at this time in 1854, was either pretending to not know or really didn't know why the wording had to be changed. That it should read, to every citizen of the United States, or to every person who shall declare his intention to become such, etc. That I understand to be the design of the amendment of the gentleman from Pennsylvania. If I am wrong in my supposition, he will correct me. And then Mr. Howe says that is it, that he's correct. Okay, so American citizens are in the Articles of Confederation. Whether it states exactly so or not is not the issue. It's whether or not Americans are free, sovereign, and independent because they belong to the states, and they are. So if we look at the Constitution, we will see that in order to be a member of Congress, either as a representative or a senator, they have to be 7 years a citizen of the United States, a capital C citizen. So individually, he had to do something, which was declare his intention to become so, which was to go to the district court's court of record, submit his application, and become an officer on the federal lands. And that was his declaration to become a citizen of the United States, to move on to the federal lands and become a public servant. Now, after 7 years of being a civil servant in the state, and when elected, shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of the state. That means he moved off the lands under the Articles of Confederation as a private person onto the federal lands as a public person. So he could no longer be a private person. He was not going to be serving in the militia. He was going to be serving as a military officer, getting paid regularly by the federal government. After 7 years, and providing he's at least 25 years old, he could become a representative at the seat of government. And the same is for senators. But Senate, the word senator means senior, and seniors required to be 9 years a citizen of the United States. And I think 27 years, something to that effect. And then here it is, a person should not attain age 30 years. He had to be 30 years old, 9 years a citizen of the United States. That means 9 years serving on the federal lands as an officer in the military before he could be elected to go to the seat of government as a senator. And also not be an inhabitant of the state. So I just want to point out the 14th Amendment, because this is where people bring up the 14th Amendment to me. But the 14th Amendment was passed illegally because it doesn't conform to the Constitution. It was an illegal act. And to do an illegal act is void. So if you commit an act outside of your oath, the act is void because it's outside the oath, meaning that you didn't have the right to do it. So to turn around and say that the states are not confederated, that they're all under the United States, is to take the power that created you, and that what you create, you control. So the Confederation created the United States military government. And because it created the military government, it's supposed to control the military government. So how can you control the military government if the thing that you made turns around and says you no longer exist? If I don't exist and I created you, then you don't exist either, because you can't exist without me. My children will never be born if I don't give birth to them. They can't turn around and say you don't exist anymore, because if I don't exist, they don't exist. Okay, and that's the same as the old maxim that the master or the servant cannot become the master. Is the same as the employee cannot become the employer. Is the same as the tenant cannot become the landlord. There's natural laws against that, and the natural laws are immutable. It doesn't matter what they write down on paper. They can write all the junk down on paper that they want. They can't mute the natural laws, and the natural laws do not have to be directly written into their papers. It doesn't matter what they write. They can't undo the natural law. Okay, and then the president, we know, has to be 14 years a citizen, and he holds his office for a term of 4 years, unless we're in peace and we revert back to the Articles of Confederation, and then he holds his term for 1 year in a 3-year period. So he serves 1 year, and then he goes on vacation for 3 years and then he can come back if he chooses. And there's basically no power as the executive officer except to aid in organizing the militia if the governor is unable to do it, or the people at the capital or state level are unable to do it. That's the only thing I've really seen that the president does as the executive officer. Everything else he does as the commander-in-chief of the land and naval forces of the United States, and the militia when called into service. And that's only for when they declare war, and they can only declare war when America's soil is attacked, when someone comes, a foreign force comes onto this land, and possibly if there's an uprising in the state. Now, an uprising in the state does not mean that a people can't change their form of government. That's not what that means. So when they declare peace, if they ever declare peace and they lose their war powers, it's highly doubtful that we will ever need the Constitution again. We'll revert back to the Articles of Confederation, to a peaceful state. All the military people, the enlisted ranks will go home. Probably most of the officers will go home. They'll have a skeleton crew at the seat of government and on the military posts. And they will probably just practice exercises and drills and practice calling the militia in to, fit them for uniforms and make sure that they have enough weapons and all this kinds of thing. So any law that they pass under the Constitution doesn't even apply off federal lands. And even if it did, are we actually in a state of war? Have they declared war on the people? Okay, so that's basically my conclusion for this video. And so I told you what I was going to tell you. I told you. And so now I'm going to conclude and summarize what I just told you. Okay, so the organic laws are the laws that go together. They're an organ, they work together. And these are the organic laws. It says so right here, organic laws. Declaration of Independence, Articles of Confederation, Ordinance of 1787, Constitution of the United States. Okay, these all work together. You can't have one without having the others, and you can't take them apart. We ran over the preamble of the Constitution, which stated the Constitution works for the Articles of Confederation. The Constitution is the United States, and they work for the United States of America. The public, under the Constitution, works for the private people under the Articles of Confederation. The Constitution is used for wartime, and when we declare peace, we're to revert back to the Articles of Confederation. The United States are not we the people, because we read in Anatomy of the State by, I think it was Murray Rothbard, that, here it is, that when we say we, we're saying that we are the government, and therefore everything the government does against us is our own fault, which we know is not true. And that would be like saying that the Jews killed themselves when the Nazis put them in concentration camps and shot them and tortured them, which of course we know cannot be true. But if we keep claiming to be we, the government, then we keep claiming to be injuring ourselves. Okay, America's under the Articles of Confederation. It's the United States of America. The private people, this is where the militia is, and this is the area where the federal government has no jurisdiction, it has no power or authority. The Articles of the Confederation are the United States of America. This is the people, these are the people and the states in their sovereign capacity, which the Constitution of the United States and the people, the representatives, the delegates of the United States are supposed to do everything that they do for the benefit of the private people under the Articles of Confederation. Instruments of war. And we talked about the private people who are the militia, who come under the commander-in-chief under the Constitution only when called into actual service, and there's no other time when private people are under the commands of the federal government in any capacity. Peace, the Constitution, war powers. Okay, so the Constitution are the war powers, and when we're not at war, the Constitution is supposed to really lay dormant. Washington's farewell speech, we went over his warning about the military institutions. Eisenhower's farewell speech, and we talked about the military industrial complex, and we talked about how he mentioned negativity and fear. And I referred you to a video I made where I talked about how the federal government circles people with negativity individually or in groups and such. And that can even include when they send the FBI agents or the CIA or the police to your group when you're trying to talk about things such as creating a new government or writing a Declaration of Independence, basically exercising your sovereign rights. How they do this, and it makes you sick and it makes you full of fear, and then when you are sick and full of fear, you die young, which is an attack on your life, your ability to live a long life. It's an attack on your happiness. It's an attack on your health. And I'd also like to bring up that in Washington's farewell speech, he talked about the well of the country, the WEAL, which is the same as WELL, which is the same as not ILL, which is the same as the Commonweal, WEAL, or Commonwealth, because your wealth was your health. Okay, the Articles of Confederation, the United States of America is our government of peace. The Constitution is the war, the U.S. war forces. It's the regulation of the land and naval forces, the right to make treaties for peace and to declare peace, and to continue keeping up with the military posts and the seat of government in time of peace via a skeleton crew. Or it was called a committee of states, which there is then one delegate per state sent. And we talked about the term of president. Article 2, the president is the executive officer of the United States of America for peace purposes, or when he has to help out a single state if a single state is having issues. And the commander-in-chief under the United States is for war purposes. So Article 2 of the Constitution, the president has two offices. One is as executive officer and one as the commander-in-chief. In war, he would serve for 4 years. In peace, he would serve for 1. The Committee of States is the committee which is the committee at the seat of government, one represented through one delegate from each state during time of peace. Okay, I inform the citizenry to stop the abuse. An informed citizenry will stop the abuse. We talked about the difference between an American citizen and a citizen of the United States. Okay, so war and peace come under two different documents. Peace, Articles of Confederation. War, the Constitution of the United States, the War Powers Act. And the Constitution is, in fact, in my opinion, an amendment to the Article of Confederation, because there is no repeal of the Articles of Confederation in the Constitution. So it just can't be. There's a long, long, long history going back hundreds of years of knowledge of the repeal of one law in the new law, of an old law and a new law. So if the Constitution repealed the Articles of Confederation, it should say, and would have said, and had been used by the founders in other circumstances, this Constitution repeals the Articles of Confederation. It did, in fact, not repeal the Article of Confederation, and there's other documentation out there to show that it's quite possible and probable that many of the documents, probably during 1812, which showed the amendment to the Articles of Confederation, have been removed from the record, okay, in many different ways. And a lot of these records were first handwritten, like such as the Journals of the Continental Congress were handwritten, and then just printed later, and printed by several different printing companies. And so these printing companies would have had to have been either coerced or bribed or threatened or just downright, I don't want to say what they would have done to them, but you can use your imagination on that, what they would have done to them to get them to remove those documents. And this is an outside source that I'm telling you about, one that I have nothing to do with, that has a long history of research on the Constitution and the founders, as well as many of the letters written, as well as the documentation from the Continental Congress. And it's on a website here somewhere, one of these websites where they have a paper written on why they believe that the Constitution was an amendment to the Articles of Confederation, and the exact location where they believe in the Continental Congress records, the handwritten records, where it would have been specifically. If I remember, it was March 6th and March 18th of 1872, and then again a year later in 1873, because they proposed it. And a lot of times they would go back to the state, they would propose it to the state, they had to come up with a plan, reasons for, reasons against, and so they were given some time to consider it, and then come back in 1783 and then talk about it again. And so Napolitano has also stated that the delegates who wrote the Constitution were charged with amending the Articles of Confederation. How they did that was left up to them, because there was no and is no way of exactly amending the Articles of Confederation. So it was left up to them, and they could have done it any way they wanted. And so it appears as though they've done it by just writing a Constitution of the United States. Okay, so you are free, sovereign, and independent. I always claim to be a private American civilian, because a civilian has no relation to the military. And I never claimed to be a citizen of the United States. And maybe if you think about this video and everything I have in it, you'll understand what I'm saying. Hopefully you do. And if you don't, then just give it some thought, go over it, listen to it a few more times if you need to, talk to it, talk about it to your friends, and recognize that you've been lied to. And you've been lied to for your whole life. Your parents were lied to. This lie has been carried on for at least 200 years. I'm thinking closer to 222 years at least. And that it's okay to say, hey, I guess I misunderstood all this. Maybe I need to take another look at it. And hopefully you will. And hopefully I've given you the proof that you needed to see that what I'm telling you is not something that I'm just making up off the top of my head. So like, share, and subscribe, and you guys have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.